Thai Ajahns, forest Ajahns, one of the things that they talk about, the things that can mess up your practice, generally it's three things that are easy to overdo and distract you from your practice. One is socializing, the other is eating, and the other is sleeping. Eating is kind of a funny one. I mostly want to talk about sleep today. Just to say a word about eating first. It's a funny thing to observe people coming in that have never done 8 precepts before, or 1 meal a day before, and it's usually the common reaction is at first they way overeat. They try and cram in enough in the one sitting, think, oh, I'm going to be so hungry tonight if I don't eat a ton of stuff. Takes a while to get the sense of it. Ajahn Chah used to advise, stop eating 3 mouthfuls before you're full, and then fill up with water. I must admit, I've never quite understood how you know you're 3 mouthfuls away from being full. That was always the two things about food that were emphasized in our tradition, was not overeating and not being fussy about your food. Just take what's ever offered. I suppose for completeness sake, I should say something about socializing. In terms of the monastic life, the Ajahn Chah addressing the monks is one of the few distractions available in the monastic life is, hang around by the sewing kuti or by the well or something and just chit chat and gossip. And it's to be discouraged. And I think it applies to any form of life, is that there's a lot of wasted breath involved in just talking about nothing. And nowadays we don't even have to be in the same room as the person to do that. I mostly want to talk about sleep and dreaming and states of consciousness. In the ordinary state of things, every human being is familiar with at least 3 different states of consciousness: waking, dreaming, and deep sleep. And with spiritual exploration, other states are available, like the jhanas in particular I'm thinking of. It's an entirely different state that doesn't fit into either of those, dreaming, sleeping, or waking. In terms of Abhidhamma, deep sleep is a continual state of bhavanga. Bhavanga is minimal consciousness. It's Bhikkhu Bodhi's book, Manual of Abhidhamma, he translates it as life continuum consciousness. I call it the mind idling in neutral. This the mind at its bare minimum, not moving, running off, taking objects, but it remains quiescent in this bhavanga state. In the waking life, we slip in and out of bhavanga, and as part of practicing sati, mindfulness, is to minimize the recursions into bhavanga. An ideal being continuous mindful taking of objects without relapses into bhavanga is the ideal. If you're dull and if you're tired and dull and not very alert, you're spending relatively more time in bhavanga consciousness. If you're wide awake, quick, bright, alert, you're not relapsing into bhavanga so often. The mind falls back into bhavanga when it's dull, there's nothing to do, it slips into bhavanga until something occurs, an object occurs to take the mind out of bhavanga, then it vibrates. It says the bhavanga vibrates 2 or 3 times and then takes the object. It's also, bhavanga is a state of mind that occurs at death and at rebirth linking. There are bhavanga moments involved. And I don't know how far you want me to go into the theory of that occurs in the Visuddhimagga and other late texts that talks about bhavanga at the death moment taking a sign of destiny, seeing a vision of the next life. And then it's that it becomes the bhavanga object for bhavanga consciousness all through the subsequent life. Now, every consciousness moment, consciousness must have an object. And according to Visuddhimagga and Abhidhamma Sangaha, bhavanga takes the same object every moment throughout life. I find this personally, and others have commented on this, find that a little odd and not really quite believable, that there's some sign of that each individual has some particular sign that occurs to the mind whenever you're in bhavanga. But anyway, that's the theory. But it's best to think of bhavanga simply as a mind in idling and minimal activity, and it occurs continuously in deep sleep. So there's a difference. Deep sleep is not totally unconscious. There's if any of you have ever been under anesthetic, you know the difference. If you've had a surgical procedure that you're put under total anesthesia, the doctor puts the anesthesiast puts the cup on your nose and says count to 10 backwards, and you go 10, 9, 8, 7, and then you open your eyes and you're in the recovery room, and there's no sense whatsoever of time having passed. That time just didn't exist for your stream of consciousness. But with deep sleep, you can sleep, and no matter how deeply you're really exhausted and you sleep like a log, you wake up 8 hours later, there's a sense that time has passed. The consciousness has not been totally obliterated. There's something has gone on, although you don't recall it and it's completely unknown. It's still, there's a sense that time has passed. So the consciousness is not completely absent. Dreaming is a state quite different from deep sleep, and the brain studies and so on will tell you that. The brainwave pattern is quite different in dreaming. There's activity going on. And what appears to be happening in dream state is that the faculty of sanya, perception, is unfettered from the signals coming from the outer world. So sanya is operating in its own internal imaginations and making things up out of fragments of memory or other sources. And occasionally the outer world can impinge on the dream. If you hear a loud noise, sometimes you can incorporate it into the dream. Some of you may have experienced that. But generally the dreaming state is completely free. It's unfettered from the senses. It's the same faculty of sanya operating in waking life, but in waking life it's constrained in its creativity by the sense inputs. The Buddha said someplace there's different causes of or sources of dreams, he said some dreams are visions of the past, some are visions of the future, some are messages from devas, and some are wind in the belly. I like to quote that to people who make too big a deal out of dreams. Most of them are just wind in the belly. It's just nonsense that the mind is patching together. But there is a possibility of dreams having meaning, that some dreams are significant. And the Buddha, before he was enlightened, had several prognostic dreams, visions of the future. One of them, for example, he saw himself lying with his head resting in the Himava, the Himalaya mountains, and his body stretched across the whole of Jambudipa, which essentially is India in this context, and his feet in the Southern Ocean. And this interpretation of that dream is that his teaching will spread over the whole world. So it is possible some dreams can occur that have great meaning. Visions of the past can be fragments of memory from previous lifetimes that can occur in dreams. You can have prognostic dreams, or dreams can be messages from the devas. Beneficent entities can contact you in the dream state. One way of thinking of it is, since the sanya in the dream state is unfettered, you could tune into a vibration of other realms of existence and experience things that are not available to you in your waking consciousness because you're fettered to these five senses. Talk a bit about practicing with sleep. The first thing, as I began with, is not to, if you seriously want to wake up, not to oversleep. There's nothing can dull the mind, darken and depress and dull out the mind more than oversleeping. The whole rest of the day you're going to be dull and not quite there. I have heard, I actually have to admit I'm not quite sure the source of this. I have heard that it's somewhere from Chinese Buddhism. There's a statement that he who sleeps more than 6 hours a night never wakes up. I don't think you can really state a number that's universally applicable in all times for everybody. To say you should get 6 hours sleep or you should get 8. I don't think that's possible. I think it varies depending on your activity. If you're doing a lot of meditation, you need less sleep. The mind is getting a lot of the rest that it needs in the meditation in a wakeful way. It doesn't need to go into unconsciousness for such a long time. In the Burmese traditional way of practicing in Mahasi Sayadaw tradition, the retreats are quite rigorous. And this is actually how I started practicing. The first few retreats I did were in the strict Mahasi style. It would be 20 hours a day of practice. There was no break. Special meditations you do for eating and for going to the toilet and everything is part of it's incorporated. And you get 4 hours of sleep. And the bell rings, you get up right away and start walking meditation. And that's actually enough. 4 hours sleep is sufficient if you're doing a lot of meditation. If you're active and busy and you need more. And it can be possible in again, if you're doing mostly meditating during the day, it's possible to get by with even less than 4 hours of actual sleep. You probably should lie down and rest the body for 4 hours. But if the mind continues to be awake, it's not a problem. one very good practice is when waking up in the morning, when you wake up, get up. And this is something else that encourages dull states of mind, is to spend any prolonged amount of time in a stuporous kind of state halfway between waking and sleeping. When you wake up, you should wake up immediately. And I think it's a good practice to try and always make a point of waking up before the sun rises. I think it's very, very brightening to the mind to see the day start, to be conscious when the day is starting. I personally find it difficult to understand how anyone can stay in bed after the sun is up, but that's partly just where I'm in my old age maybe. I have to admit I could easily do it when I was 20, but now I find it impossible. There's a teaching about the postures of sleep that is kind of interesting. It's sleeping on the left side is sensual consciousness. Sleeping on the back is ghost consciousness. Sleeping on the belly is animal consciousness, and sleeping on the right side is Buddha consciousness. That's the way the Buddha always slept, on his right side. It's the lion's posture. Now, the ideal posture is on your right side with your head resting on your hand and your upper leg slightly bent at the knee. It's the lion's posture. You'll see as statues of the Buddha in the reclining pose is always like that. There's a note about the ghosts. Why ghosts always sleep on their back is because their because their skeleton is so flimsy they can't bear their weight if they sleep on their side. So they have to sleep on their back. It's possible to meditate going to sleep, and that's interesting in a number of ways. One is something the Tibetans talk about, is that the states of abandonment that occur as you fall asleep follow the exact sequence, but in a milder way, as happens when you're dying. So if you can go to sleep consciously, it's a rehearsal for dying consciously. If you meditate as you fall asleep, watch your mind states falling asleep, you can notice the faculties falling away. And for example, at some point you lose the faculty of cognitive thought. It's no longer possible to think, although the mind can still create imagery. It can no longer make cogent thoughts. And if you're aware of that, it might upset you a little bit. You try and prove you can still think. You start thinking, then you just wake up a little bit. You back up a stage. But if you just let it go, you can watch these faculties drop away. Another thing the Tibetans say is that at the moment of falling asleep is one of the 4 moments that you spontaneously realize the great white light, the primordial white light of voidness. And those 4, in increasing order of intensity, they're when you sneeze is one, when you have an orgasm, when you fall asleep, and when you die. There's a moment of realizing the voidness of the white light. I think that's probably why, without understanding it, that's probably why there's sometimes been desire to induce sneezing. People used to take snuff and sneeze, and I remember when I was a little kid, I found a way of tickling the inside of my nose with a bit of tissue to make myself sneeze. I used to like doing that. A good practice, if you're trying to develop meditations around sleep, a very good practice is to make a resolution as you're going to sleep. I'm going to try and catch the last breath falling asleep and the first breath waking up. If you can manage to do that, it's very interesting. Usually people find it a little easier to catch the first breath waking up, which itself is quite an illuminating experience. It really makes it clear the difference between sleep and wake, because it's like you turn a switch on and you're fully awake. And there's no intermediate state whatsoever. You suddenly are awake and you're just right on. And it's quite nice. The other end, though, is more profound. If you can watch the mind actually cross the threshold into sleeping, and the first thing that occurs is dream state, you can walk mindfully from waking into dreaming. There are different ways of working with dreams. One practice is keeping a dream journal, to write down your dreams. This is very good for developing dream recall. You make a habit of writing down your dreams immediately upon awaking. And if you wake up in the middle of the night with a dream, after having had a dream, turn a light on, light a candle, and have a notebook ready beside your bed and just start scribbling down the main points and get it down while it's immediate. And some people take it a stage further and analyze the dreams later by going through, after you've accumulated a number, you can use colored pencils and mark themes across different dreams. I've never had any much interest in doing that. I wanted to develop dream recall. I practiced that journaling for a while. It got kind of disruptive of my sleep pattern, because I would sleep for an hour and a half and then wake up and write down, spend 15-20 minutes writing down long, elaborate, nonsensical dreams, and then go back to sleep. But the dream recall can become really very detailed and clear. Another practice is lucid dreaming, to be conscious in your dream state. That's something else interesting to explore. And I'll give you a very simple way. There's different methods out there for lucid dreaming. I'll give you a very simple method of inducing lucid dreaming. It takes a few days for it to work. What you do is, during the course of your waking day, 4, 5, 6 times during the day at random times, you stop mentally whatever you're doing just for a few seconds and seriously ask yourself, am I awake now or dreaming? And try and feel the difference. Try and feel, how does this feel to be, am I awake or dreaming? And make that so it becomes ingrained in your consciousness as a kind of a habit. And then after a few days to a week, it'll occur in your dream. You'll ask yourself, am I awake or dreaming? And the first time it occurs, you may be confused and you may think you're awake, and then you just lose it. But at some point you'll say, oh, I'm dreaming. And if that doesn't startle you enough to wake you up, you'll be in a lucid dream. And there's degrees of lucidity. You can kind of go in and out of being very lucid to being just slightly lucid. One thing to try, if you are in a lucid dream, try doing walking meditation. Another thing is, if you come across any written material, books or notices in your dreamscape, try and read them and try and remember what you read. That's very difficult. You have to be extremely lucid to be able to read something and hold it. Now, these are things you can explore with the dream state. That's not just a game. it helps you to understand the nature of mind and the nature of perception and the nature of consciousness by being conscious and aware in another modality. It helps you to be more conscious, more wakeful in your ordinary waking consciousness. It's the whole theme of practice is to be more awake, to be more awakened. That's what Buddha means, is the awakened one who is awake. Samma Sambuddho is perfectly self-awakened. So if you can develop some consciousness around the transition into sleep, out of sleep, and in the dreaming state, you gain a lot of knowledge about the mind and about processes of perception and the way we construct our reality. And if you can also experience jhana states, then you've got a whole nother realm of consciousness as a comparison. You have the consciousness of the form realm to compare to the sense desire realm. As dreaming and waking are both sense desire realm modalities. So you can then see their similarity, their family resemblance as compared to jhana is something else again. And the more you have some understanding and cognizance of these different modalities of mind, the less you will feel bound to any one of them. And then it becomes possible to release them all and realize nibbana, the unconditioned.